Hey.
All right.
Hello.
Hello. Looks like we're on live.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, hi. How's
Hello.
everybody?
Hi, everyone tuning in.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got some friends here already, huh? Good to see everybody. All
Great.
right.
Great.
Well, I'm Renata Yarborough Sanders, and I'm here with Tania and Lisa. And today we are so glad that people are joining us. We realize this is a holiday and a holiday weekend for a lot of people. And so we're just happy that anybody that's chosen to share this time with us here today, please be sure to share and tell your friends they can watch the show after the fact. And we would love to have anybody's participation in the chat today. I am here in Newport News, Virginia. And Tania, you're down there where?
I'm in here from Nashville, Tennessee.
Tennessee. And we'd like to welcome our guest, Lisa Lisson, who's here with us today. Lisa, would you like to just tell our guest a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm Lisa, and I'm actually in Raleigh, North Carolina. So right outside of Raleigh. So we kind of got this little triangle of the southern states here going. So, but I'm Lisa, and I am the owner and creator of the website Are You My Cousin, where I teach and write about all things genealogy, as well as I have a YouTube channel as well where I do weekly lives at 3 p.m. on Eastern Standard Time every Thursday. So it's all genealogy all the time.
Right. All right. Well, we are going to get ready to jump right into our content. We know that people have other things to do today, so we're going to go right in. And today we are talking about North Carolina death records, and I am going to just get ready to share my screen. Oh, what did I just do? Here it comes. Hopefully everybody can see that. And I'm just
Yes.
going to go ahead and introduce the topic today. We kind of switched our roles around. So we're going to start off talking about what a death record actually is. And I created my own definition. So for the first time, I'm able to just quote myself. So for me, a death record is any document which reveals information, whether it's suggested or accurate, because you will see both, about the death of a human being. And so a lot of times when we talk about death records, people just see it as a death certificate, but there's so much more. And that's what we're going to spend our time talking to you about today. So to start off, death records are really the most recent records that we have available to us about a person's life or about a person, with the exception of estate records, which we consider to also be in the category of death records. So it gives you some very recent information about the person. And it's also important to know that death records are kept in the state where a person dies, where the death occurred. So even if they didn't live there, like for instance, one of my great grandmothers was visiting her daughter in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but she lived here in Chesapeake, Virginia. Her death certificate is located in the Philadelphia archives. So it's also not where you're buried, but that death information, and Lisa will talk about this in a little while, is that death certificate will let you know where a person is buried. And death records provide useful genealogical information like dates, places, names, and medical information about the deceased that could be helpful for your family's medical history. And we'll be talking all about that today. Now, North Carolina officially began recording deaths in 1913, which was the same time we talked about when they began recording births. And at that time, the North Carolina General Assembly ratified an act to require the registration of births and deaths in the state. But there are some counties that have earlier records, and we'll be sharing in just a minute where you can find some of those earlier records. Okay. And This was actually something that was new information for me, not the stillborn, but death records. Death certificates were also created for stillborn and fetal deaths. And I didn't know the fetal part. I have stillborn death records in my own genealogy that I've seen. And it wasn't until 1920 when the state actually achieved full compliance on death certificates. So you may still find some gaps where you know a family member or you suspect that a family member was deceased between 1913 and 1920, and those records might not be available. So we always like to share with you about the big two, Ancestry and Family Search, and what they have available for you. And again, Tania and Lisa are going to be talking to you about some additional resources. But from Family Search, they actually have 3 sets of North Carolina death records available. They have an index with images from 1906 to 1930, so that you'll pick up a few of those counties that had the earlier death records in that record set. And then they have another set that goes from 1931 to 1934. This is a name index only. And then finally, they have a record of deaths and burials from 1898 to 1994. And that's also a name index. So if you want to see actual images from Family Search, you'll need to use that first link. And just a reminder, all these links will be available on our YouTube page after the show. The difference that I found is where they were getting the information from, which is why they have different sets for what looks like the same thing. So that seems to be what determines that. And then Ancestry has the North Carolina death indexes from 1908 to 2004. And again, that is just an index again, but they also have the images and the transcriptions, which, remember, you need to be very careful about transcriptions. Always look at the image if it's available, look at it for yourself. But they have those from 1909 to 1976 on Ancestry.com. And that's where, again, they have the stillborn and fetal deaths. Oops. And that's the end of my little part. Sorry. And so now we're going to go over to Tania, and Tania is going to talk about the Social Security Death Index.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and share my screen. So Renata, would you stop sharing yours?
Certainly.
Excellent. All right. So hopefully this will come up for everyone. So we should be seeing and looking at pretty soon here the Social Security Death Index. Is that showing for y'all, ladies? Just want to make sure before I keep going.
It's coming.
It's coming. Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
All right.
That you've started.
All right. So the Social Security Death Index, this is a database that was so helpful to me when I was initially getting started in my own family history research. I'm sure it's been helpful for y'all too as well. But I love this database, and we wanted to just share some highlights around it. Let me see if I can get my...
Still not seeing it, Tania.
Still not seeing it. Yeah, I see that it's blank on the live still. Let me... Oh, because it's
in
paused.
holiday mode.
Okay, I somehow hit pause. So that's what happened. So let's see if this makes it. Are you seeing a newspaper article now?
I do.
Okay. I wonder how that happened. I must have hit something on my keyboard. Well, that's all right. So the Social Security Death Index is a database of deaths that have been reported to the Social Security Administration, which was signed by President Roosevelt August 15th, 1935. So, you know, I like newspapers. Well, you'll learn more about that as we get to the newspapers episode. So I went and just pulled a few newspaper articles and highlighted the date at which that happened. So I think we're all familiar with what the Social Security Administration provides. This was a way to give benefits, post-employment benefits. So that was when the act was signed into law, was 1935. So after this point, to get the benefits, the death needed to be reported to the agency so that those benefits could be provided. So that is where we end up with the SSDI. It's the database of reported deaths. Now, it's important to note that the SSDI does not include every person who's passed away, and it does not include every person with a Social Security number. So that's just a consideration to think about as you're searching it, because if you don't find someone in the database, it doesn't mean they didn't die, they didn't pass away. It's just you need to keep looking for other sources of information. The coverage of SSDI. So the act was passed in 1935. Then in 1962 is when electronic records started to be kept. So most of the coverage of SSDI is 1962 forward, because we're able to leverage the electronic collection of data. There are some deaths before 1962, but most of it is after that time point. We have a link here on the page to the Family Search Wiki description of the database. And it's interesting because they give you a sense for how many deaths in the United States are covered in different time ranges. So between 1962 and 1971, about half of the deaths in the United States are included. From 1972 to 2005, about 85% of the deaths are included. And then it becomes even more comprehensive after 2005. Now, another consideration with the SSDI is our data access stops in 2014. It was around this time that additional rules and regulations were put in place to limit how much information was publicly available. And that's publicly available. The actual source of content comes from what's called the death master file. So there are certain agencies and individuals that can get access to that, and that's current. But public access stops at around 2014. So again, just something to keep in mind. There are several places you can get to the SSDI. I like to use Family Search, such a great source because it's free. You can just go search it free on the Family Search website. And you can search by name, and you can search deaths as well. And we have a link here that will be in the show notes. And what do you get when you look at an SSDI record? So these are records for a couple of my ancestors. And you get the person's name, the event date, which is the death. And in most cases, you'll get a month and a year. About 25% of the entries actually have a death date. But in most cases, it'll be month and year, which can be helpful in helping you further narrow down if you're trying to find out the exact death date. Many records also have a place. So the event place is not necessarily where the person passed away. So I think not everyone realizes that right away, when they're first learning how to use a database. So in the case of my great-grandfather, William Lawhorn, his event place was Craven County, North Carolina. Now, this was where he passed away. But what this place is the location on file with the SSA where the last benefits were received. So it may be where the person passed away, it may not be. So you'll have to do additional research just to verify that location. So, and I just wanted to finish up with this. When you locate a Social Security death index entry, you may want to consider ordering the actual application form for the Social Security number. It's called the SS5, and it can be ordered for $24 right now from the SSA under Freedom of Information Act, because you can get additional details about that person, such as a parent's names, or the employer, where they were living. So in some cases, I've ordered these. Have either of you ordered the SS5 forms? Oh, yeah. They can be expensive if you keep ordering them. But when you're trying to track down someone elusive, it's worth considering. So
it took me a long time to give in and
yes.
get around to doing that. I was just, and I knew because we have such a great genealogy community, and, people would talk about that or share what they'd gotten. And I was just really stubborn about that for some reason. I think I just ordered my first one about 2 years ago.
Okay.
And I've been doing this for 23 years. So yeah, sometimes we can be stubborn, right?
Right.
I haven't ordered a lot of those, but yeah.
And Ancestry actually has an index to these now, so that's helpful. But still, if you can get the actual one, might be worth it. So just wanted to share that.
I didn't think it was going to have anything that I hadn't already gotten from elsewhere. And so it got down to one of my elusive great-grandparents who I really didn't have a lot of information about. And that was the one that I finally broke down and
okay.
So,
did it help you? Did it provide something?
It had like one thing that I didn't that I didn't know. So Well, thank you, Tania. That was a great segment. And now we're here for the meat of the show with our guest today. Lisa is going to present a plethora of information about North Carolina death records. And Lisa, before you start, I just want to take a minute just to welcome so many people that I see here. We're starting to have, I guess, what we could call regulars now that we're on our third show. And I do see a few friends who have been here. I'm not going to call every name, but I just want to thank Derek and Ron and Yurika, and there's Selma Brooks Alston. I see Kathy Nebraska. No, I'm gonna mess that up. Naborowski. Gary's here from Toledo, Ohio, and Marilyn Trevino. Adrian's here from right here in Newport News. She's one of my OGS chapter members. And Mavis is here. Sherry is here, and Minnie, and there are just so many. We'll call some more names afterwards. Archery is here, but I'm just kind of going down the list. We like to say hello. So Tania, I know you'll grab the rest of them on the next
yeah.
one.
It's great to see the interactions
Lisa,
in the comments too. So thank you all.
Yeah. Lisa, we're excited about what you have to share with us. So go right ahead and share your screen.
Well, wonderful. Yeah, let me share my screen here and we will get going, because I do love talking genealogy all the time. Let me get that.
I think many of us are in that boat, right?
Okay. Like, well, I think most of us are in that boat. Yes, I know. I was talking to my about that today. Okay, so we are here to talk about North Carolina death records. And I have to tell you, my kids, even though they're adult kids, they think I'm a little weird because, you know, I get really excited about things like this. And they're like, Mom, not again, you know. So anyway, so let's find our North Carolina. Let's talk about those. So I know Renat had mentioned earlier, you know, 1913 is kind of that pivotal date. That's the date that we need to know in North Carolina when it comes to death records, because that's when death certificates began. And of course, there are a few locations you can get them earlier, but for the most part, it's that 1913 time period. So before 1913, we really have to we have to use alternative resources. We're not going to be looking for that death certificate. And this is something I tell my readers so frequently, is make sure when records were started to be used, because I have a lot of times people will email me, I cannot find a death certificate for my ancestor who died in 1890. I tell them to stop looking because it's not there. So it's important to know these dates so that you don't waste your research time looking for records that weren't around. And so for North Carolina, that is obviously 1913. So those records, for where else would we look when you're thinking that 1913? Well, there's certainly the family Bible. That's kind of the big thing people want to find. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Family letters and papers. Gravestones, obituaries, newspapers, wills and estates, mortuaries, schedules, all of these have potential to give us the death date, or at least an approximate death date. Sometimes you have to do a little math on our ancestors. So we're going to take a close-up look at some of these kinds of things. So the first thing that I always recommend folks is to check for family letters, papers, and keepsakes. These are the kinds of things like the obituaries, the funeral cards. You might find it written in a letter. I have found things. And oftentimes, the first thing people tell me is, oh, but our family doesn't have anything. And then I'm going to actually come back and go, are you sure? Because maybe these things didn't get passed down your side of the family, but they very well could have come down a cousin's side of the family, a collateral side of the family. So make sure you're reaching out to other researchers on the same lines, and then those collateral lines to see what their family might have had, kind of thing. The other thing, if you are talking to family members, you're talking to cousins, check the back of the family Bible to see if there was an obituary stuck in the back. My family liked to stick things in the Bible. But it could be a favorite book. It could be a journal. It could be stuck in just a box that's in the back of a closet of an aunt that totally forgot about it. So all of these things are there sometimes. And if you ask, it starts to jog people's memories, as opposed to, you know, waiting for somebody to offer, I'm doing family history. Do you have anything? And they typically go, no,
right.
You know, but then they'll come back. If you keep at it, sometimes you can find it. So that's my soapbox for that. Now, when I talk about, once you've kind of exhausted your family and family records, it's a great place to go would be the North Carolina Digital Collections. And there's the link up there, and we'll have that in the show notes as well. And so as North Carolina researchers, we are so, so fortunate. We have this wonderful digital collection that the archives has done. And I use it almost all the time every time I research, but I wanted to kind of show you guys a collection that you definitely want to look at. Now, I mentioned that you want to find a family Bible, and a lot of folks will tell me, but we don't have a family Bible. And again, I'm like, are you sure? Check these digital collections for whatever state, but in this case, North Carolina. It's right down here. Let me get to the next one. There it is. You want to find the family records. You want to click through there. Oh, and you can see a little up close there what it looks like, because I know it's kind of hard to see. It's kind of small. And it takes you to this page here, the Family Records Collection. Now, this Family Records Collection has a tremendous amount of information on it. They have, look at this, guys, they have nearly 1,500 Bible records that have all kinds of information. Yeah. So that's a lot of Bible records to check, and your family could be part of this collection. I had recently, well, a few years ago, when I got my DAR Patriot approved to the DAR and accepted, I started getting emails from people, and they were asking me, how did you make that final connection? How did you do this? We've been trying for ages. And I said, it's in the family Bible. And they went, you could have heard a pin drop. It was really amazing. They were like, what do you mean, the family Bible? I said, I have a copy of the family Bible. And they didn't know it existed. But here's the kicker. It's online at the archives, in the digital collections. It was on, and I think it might just be a transcription, but the point is it existed and it was online already. Yes. So make sure you're checking. Amazing. The other thing is they update this. They are seeking out family Bibles that they can digitize. And they don't keep your family Bible. You can actually, they'll digitize it and give it back to you. So that's a good place to go look as well. So I would encourage you to explore this area on the family records. Also, they have some of their vertical files are digitized and online, and you can find evidence, just like funeral cards and obituaries stuck in those as well. So definitely you want to check that out. Okay, wills and estates. So wills and estates are absolutely a gold mine when it comes to finding information about somebody's death, if you can find them. Now, hopefully, if somebody died with a will, what you need to remember is that the date the will was written is not the specific date generally that the person died. So they probably wrote it. They might have died very close in, or they could have died several years after. So you also want to look at the end to see when it was probated, because that can give you a range for when that person died. Estate records may give you, oftentimes I tend to find month and year. I don't always find a specific date, but sometimes I do. I don't know what your experiences have been with that, but definitely can start to use those to piece together the death information on somebody. So this is actually a piece from the estate sale for Calvin Maddox. He's out of he died in 1848 in Chatham County, North Carolina. Now, lucky for me, Calvin died without a will. And so because he died without a will or intestate, and he was a fairly young man, it generated a lot of records because he had a wife and he had children and he had land, and it was like, so I hit the genealogy jackpot. Unfortunately, wasn't as good for his family because they had to go through all this. But that will, where everybody sat out there and said, we don't know when he died. When I pulled that estate record, they told me when he died. They gave me, I don't have a date, but I have a month and a year and exactly when he died. Yeah. And so that was a nice way of being able to follow through with that. And there's so much you can pull out of these estate records beyond just the death date. Obviously, you can pull a lot of socioeconomic type of information from sales. You can find the neighborhoods, who the neighbors are. Look closely at the bonds that are included. Sometimes you can pick up specific dates there as well. The biggest tip that I would give you when it comes to looking at a will or an estate record and you're trying to find that date is to read every single page of that estate record. Now, I realize it could be a big estate record. This Calvin's was about 40 pages long of this kind of handwriting. So it took a while, but I did it. But read every single page because, you know, it may be, you know, if you're looking for that very specific date, it may not be until halfway through that you find the date itself. You may just be working on a month or a year. So make sure you read every single.
I am reading one for client work right now, and it's 517 images, and you know that's 2 pages per image.
Right.
And it's horrible. I actually am thinking about hiring an assistant, like a young college kid or something like that. But I wanted Lisa just to comment too, for those of us who are researching formerly enslaved ancestors, estate records are often where we can find out the vitals on them, that, you know, they were born or they were joined together with someone, or that they were deceased. So that's just another hint to those who are researching the formerly enslaved. Sometimes in those inventories, because the probate can take years and years and years, you can see that your ancestor was there when the will, when the administration began, when the probate work began, and then 10 years later, their name might be scratched through and it'll say died. So you might not have an exact year, but that's just a great, I guess I shouldn't say it's great, but it's just a way that we can sometimes pick up a tidbit about an enslaved ancestor also.
And that actually brings up another point that I was thinking. So sometimes, you know, if somebody died, particularly intestate, and they would name a guardian for the child. So maybe the children, you know, a young child was actually inheriting, you know, a lot of property, or the children, including the enslaved, that if you follow the guardianship account records through the court records, sometimes you can track that out as well and find out if perhaps an enslaved person has passed away. They'll sometimes note that because the guardian has to make an accounting to the government or to the court each year about, or maybe each quarter, but they have to make that accounting to show that they're handling the money well until that child comes of age to be able to handle it themselves. So that's sometimes I've seen evidence there of deaths of enslaved as well. So that's another place to go look.
Wow, Margot Williams said she had to order an estate that was over 1,000 pages and probated over a 40-year span.
Oh my word!
My goodness.
Yeah,
that's probably a little bit like reading. It's almost like reality TV for your ancestors, because that was obviously probably a contentious thing. And you start to read and you get their personalities come out and this kind of stuff. So it's an interesting thing. I know we talked about family search earlier to find death records, but also the North Carolina probate records, the loose estate records, are online at Family Search as well over there. So that's been that was a really great project that the North Carolina Genealogical Society kind of spearheaded, and it's been a fabulous way to research those estate records, that's for sure.
I was part of that many years ago.
Yes, you were. Yes, you were. Pension records. Now, I know we think about military records and pension records, but the widows, you know, the pension record for the soldier as well as the widow's pension records are excellent places to find that death date for a female ancestor and a male ancestor as well, actually. But I actually use the example of the War of 1812 here because I think sometimes we as North Carolina researchers, we don't really always think about the War of 1812 that much, but we absolutely, North Carolinians did participate in that. And so I wanted to point that out. And these are actually free all the time at Fold 3. So the War of 1812 pension records are free on Fold 3 all the time. So that's a nice thing. So this is an example, and you can see this is Mary Martin. She was a widow, and you can see they've stamped all over it that, you know, that she was dead. So we know that she had been receiving it, and then we know that we can know when they stopped. So she started receiving it, it looks like in January 17, 1920, no, 79, excuse me, I can't read that.
Yeah.
And then they tell you when it stopped. And so, and the reason it stopped is because she was dead. So they dropped her from the list. So that's a way to find for a female, but you may also find these for the male as well. But I have a real thing for female ancestors, so I pulled the females. But check the pension record, again, Revolutionary War pension records, which are free currently on Fold 3 through the 15th of July, I think. So Fold 3's got those open, the Revolutionary War pension records. So that's something you might want to check out if you've got time. But pension records in general are good ones to track down. And again, you have to sometimes read through those quite a bit to find when that death occurred. So just take your time, get your reading glasses out and take your time. Now, special collections are other places to absolutely check for our ancestors' death records. Now, it's not, you sometimes have to infer it a little bit, but special collections, I think we overlook sometimes as researchers because we're not always really sure how to use them, where to find them, or what they could contain. But I've started really digging into some of these special collections and really amazed at what I've been finding. But so those special collections, that could be things like the plantation records. So the running of the plantation, and again, you would find evidence perhaps of the death of an enslaved person. But family letters, they'll have diaries, even photos. Be sure and check the back because sometimes they'll put a death date on the back of a photo. But you never quite know what you're going to find in a special collection until you actually go and look at those kinds of things. Family letters will talk about the death of a loved one. They might, diaries might talk about the death of a loved one. So it's important to check these special collections, particularly when you are researching in one of the burned counties, or maybe, as I said, a female ancestor who didn't have a lot of records. This might be your only evidence of somebody. So in the North Carolina archives, they actually had I think it's still there, the big black book where you can go through the finding aid. And I just asked the archivist, if you've never used a special collection, ask the archivist to show you how to use their finding aid, because otherwise you could spin your wheels a lot and waste a lot of time. And they're more than willing and happy to help you access those, because they can be so critical in your research, and really kind of, they're fun to research too. They're really fun to research.
Lisa, can I back on the previous slide? I give a talk called Researching Enslaved Ancestors. It Takes a Village, and I talk all about how descendants of the enslavers may hold certain records right there in their own private collections that could help the descendant of the enslaved. And those 4 items that you have on there are a big part of that I spend time talking about on that presentation. So I just want to take this opportunity to say to people who are watching, if you have any of those types of documents either in your possession or that you have accessed online for your own ancestors, you are very likely to find mentions, just like Lisa said, not only about deaths, but about births and about other instances of information that might not be available for descendants of enslaved ancestors. So please make that public. Someone has already asked me if I would share some of the places that you can upload that kind of information. So I've asked him to email me, and I'm happy to share that at yarsan@aol.com. We'll show you that in a minute. So we do like to stay on the topic, but I just couldn't resist, since your slide was so perfect, I just couldn't resist taking a minute to let people know that you could have something that seems like the tiniest little mention to you, but to me, who doesn't know when my great-great-grandfather was born or died or whatever, it could be a gold mine. So thanks again. Yeah,
absolutely. Gravestones and cemeteries. Okay, I love cemetery research. It's one of my favorite things. So I think we're typically very familiar with FindAGrave and billion graves, and I'm going to talk about that in just a sec. But what I wanted to kind of tell you a little bit about gravestones and cemeteries is to when you're doing that, make sure you recognize that there are mistakes on a tombstone and a gravestone. So go ahead, absolutely, get your photographs, get your information, but I actually like to verify it if I can through something else, because there are mistakes. I have found mistakes in my own family's gravestones, and they were expensive to fix, so people didn't always fix them. Or they might have been put up years after the fact. And so by somebody, maybe a grandchild, maybe the family didn't have money. So just kind of keep that in mind a little bit. And don't forget to check with the cemetery office for their cemetery and burial records, because those can be really, really helpful in what you do and what you're looking for. So I wanted to show you FindAGrave and Billion Graves. So I think a lot of us are familiar with that, but a couple of things to keep in mind. So the Billion Graves is a nice one. They actually are GPS located. So people actually attach GPS coordinates to the grave sites. So that's really nice if you're standing in a really large cemetery. It helps you narrow down on that. But both of these, I want you to remember, are online. They are user submitted sites. So people are, basically donating the information. They're out there taking pictures. You can request pictures to be taken, etc. You can you can request the photographs. Sometimes you can search by cemetery, you can search by individual. I will tell you, particularly on FindAGrave, if you're searching for you've got to be really specific. I actually go pretty wide and broad on my search request on that, because if I'm off, if I don't spell that first name right, or I don't spell that last name right, or how it's listed on FindAGrave, then it probably will not return that result. So it's a little tight on their search results. So I try to be pretty broad with my search terms there. But both of these are very good. But the caution here is, if a lot of times the users will upload the information, but then they might also upload some genealogy type of information there. Be very careful, guys, because there are a lot of mistakes up there. So don't take it's like copying stuff from somebody else's tree that's not sourced. Just use it with a grain of salt, or use it as a clue, but always, always verify any type of genealogy information beyond the photo and the location of that tombstone before you start adding it to your tree. For that.
Can I share something that I like about Billion Graves in particular? They're very clear in how they label genealogy added information. So that's helpful for users, because then as you said, you can really pay attention and say, oh, that's extra information that may need to be verified.
Exactly. And what I like too is that, particularly on FindAGrave, you can put in like a photo request, so that, maybe I know that my ancestor's buried in a certain graveyard, but it's 1,000 miles away and not some place that I can get to. Then I can put that request in, and hopefully the next time somebody's there, they will take a photo of it for me and put it out, and so that I can see it. If at all possible, I try to get to the cemetery to be able to, because there's a lot that you can get standing in the cemetery, physically standing there. I have a whole article on my website for that, guys. You can search for that. But these are fabulous resources, because, face it, we can't necessarily go these places to find these graves.
Do you find that the two sites are very different? Like there's a lot on one that's not on the other?
I think it's sort of, yes, and I can't say I've really looked at it quite from that angle. I tend to use FindAGrave more often than Billion Graves, but
I find them different.
Yeah,
I use Billion Graves more than FindAGrave.
Really?
I contribute to Billion Graves more than FindAGrave, because on Billion Graves you just have to take it's easier on Billion Graves. You just upload the picture, someone else transcribes it. So, but I find differences. Although I think because Billion Graves just hasn't been around as long, it's not as big, but they're catching up. So sometimes I'm surprised by what I find there.
Yeah, I think you have to check them all. I do check them all actually, but I think because FindAGrave's just been around longer.
So long,
Well, one of my pet peeves about FindAGrave is that people and I know they mean well, but they go on there and they just upload information from death certificates. And unfortunately, there's so much incorrect information on death certificates. So I have found them for my family members, and half of what's on there is wrong because it's wrong on the death certificate. And I've also found them for people I already had a memorial for. And so I've had to ask people to take theirs down. So, but they're both great services that we're lucky to have available.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are very fortunate. And as North Carolina researcher, well, and this is for anybody, but cemeterycensus.com is a fabulous resource. Yeah, and I love cemeterycensus.com. Now, they do cover multiple states, but it was started by two gentlemen who are here in North Carolina, and has a lot of North Carolina counties covered here. What I love about cemeterycensus.com, and again, just check all three. I mean, just check, because you never know, is that a lot of times I'm finding the small family cemeteries that are like out in the woods somewhere, you might find documented here, particularly Surrey County, as you can see. I mean, they took it upon themselves. I mean, they have 482, that they have listed there. And I actually talked to some of the guys who did that one, who did a lot of the work in Surrey County. And yeah, I mean, these things were like middle of the woods. You
never get to them.
It took a genealogist to even know that was a cemetery on some of them.
Right.
But and these were men who'd lived there all their lives. They knew a lot, and they had gone into church records to help document who was there, because there were a lot of the graves that didn't have the sites or gravestones anymore. So yeah, this is a great site. You don't want to miss this one either. So it's a great one.
I love cemeteries.
I do too.
All righty.
Mortality schedules. People don't necessarily think to look for mortality schedules, but 1850 to 1880, on those census records, we have these extra schedules, and you'll find mortality schedules on those, and you want to look these up. Now, there are actual images. Unfortunately for North Carolina, I think they only have them for 1850, and there were no actual images at this point. So they just had the listing. But you can find, when somebody died, although this one, okay, I pulled it in 1860, sorry. I just realized, like, what is that?
Yeah,
it tells who died within the previous 12 months. Now, that doesn't necessarily, that typically might mean, so depending on when the census date was, it's the previous year from that. So, it might be, if the census date was for May 1st, it means all the way back to the previous May. It doesn't mean 1849 from January to December. It means, June of 1849 to April of 1850, that kind of thing. So the dates are skewed a little bit. So you got to remember that makes a difference. But it tells you when they were, how old they were. It tells you their birth. It tells you can pick up an occupation here, which is really cool. Cause of death, typhoid fever. So it's a really interesting. I think it's interesting to read kind of the trends. It's really sad, actually.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah. So
I had one that showed a 4-year-old of my great grandparents who died, and so she's in the 1871, and it just says burned, and so I've always tried to find something else about that, and I haven't, so I don't know what happened, but I just know that she was burned and died sometime, prior to.
And you see that is tough. I mean, you see unfortunately, people dying of things that people just really don't die of anymore. Type things. So it is an interesting thing. It's interesting to look at it and see, particularly if you're losing a lot of people at one time, was there, a major epidemic? Was there, was it flu season? Was it, typhoid fever that got people? So that's definitely another way. But check these mortality schedules as well. They're excellent resources before that. So that brings us up to 1913 and beyond. We have the death certificates. So we have the archives, the ones that are at the archives. You can find them at the County Register of Deeds, usually, and the Division of Public Health. I will be honest, sometimes what I have done is I have asked, if I'm not able to find them at the archives or if I'm not able to get there, I get them from the Register of Deeds, and I've had really good luck with that, particularly the more current ones that way. So that's an interesting way to go about it. But as Renata said, you know, compliance for these things did not take place for quite a while. It was like all the way up to after the First World War, really up to 1920, because, you know, if you were like my ancestors and you were rural farmers and you didn't really live close and the doctor was going house to house, obviously, you know, they had important things to do, like taking care of the farm, which is more important than registering a birth at that point. So that was, or a death at that point. So that was part of how that would work. This is a 1927 death certificate, and I want to take some time to go through this. And this one's got some unusual things to it. So that was the other reason I wanted to show this one, and to show you how death certificates may or may not always be correct, as we know. So just first and foremost up front, a death certificate is not always correct. It is not considered a primary source. So I want you to make sure you understand that. This is from 1927. This is for Mrs. Mattie V. Howard. Her name was Mattie Maddox, was her maiden name. You'll notice she died in Wake County. You notice here, you'll get the address. So sometimes you can get a very specific address if they died at home. So then you actually know where their home is. And you can, but for Mattie, she died at the state hospital here in Raleigh. So that was Dick's Hospital at the time. And so that's all that we get up there. They didn't even give us her maiden name, which was kind of odd when you think about it. But we have, you know, she was female, she was white. They say she was married, but look at this. They didn't give her her husband's name, the husband's name. And so, and he was very much alive. I will tell you that because it was my ancestor, and he actually outlived her. Well, he lived to be 103, so he was very much alive, but they didn't do it. They didn't know her date of birth. So I thought that was interesting. They did know she was 45 years old. So if you need to, so this is where math comes in sometimes, guys. If you have a death certificate and all you have is an age, maybe they didn't put the birth date, or maybe, you know, you got to do a little math to figure it out, but that can be helpful sometimes, or especially when they get really specific. Her occupation. Okay, she was an inmate at the state hospital, which threw me as a new genealogist this was one of the first things I ever pulled, and I was like, what do you mean she was an inmate? So she actually had brain surgery, so that's why she was there. They did tell me she was born in Chatham, so that was pretty good. Look at this. So on her death certificate, you can get a parent's names. So we have James Maddox, and we have where he was born, and we have her mother's name, Martha J. Lett, and we have where she was born as well. Now, this number 14 right here, this is crucial, guys. Never ever skip this particular box somewhere on there. They will have an informant box, and this is the person who is providing all of this information. Now, in this case, this is the records from the state hospital. So they don't have all the information apparently, because they don't have her husband's name, but yet why they had her mother's name, I'm not real sure. But anyway, they didn't have it all. So this is not somebody who knows her personally. They are literally copying something that's already been copied. So you want to know who this is. If this is a person's spouse, then this information up here is probably going to be a little closer to accurate. But maybe this person, I mean, guys, it could be the next door neighbor for all you know, or it could be, you know, a niece or a nephew, and who wasn't necessarily that close to the family. Maybe they didn't have any children. So you've got to understand who this is and how they related to the deceased. Otherwise, in that way, you will have a sense of how accurate is this, somebody who could have possibly known that information there as well. So keep that in mind as you go. You'll get your death date over here. So they'll give you the actual death date, and then they'll have what she died from or what your ancestor died from. So this is, I find kind of interesting because I actually have a medical background, but so she died of exhaustion with psychosis, type undetermined. So basically what that means, and pulling on oral history, is that she likely we think she probably, hindsight 2020, she probably had a brain tumor of some sort. But based on eyewitness accounts of the children, her children, and their take on it from as children. So it was very sad that she did die at a young age, but gives us here again about, if other things. There was no autopsy, no death, no surgery prior to death. And we have the doctor's signature down here. So that can be helpful occasionally, guys. Again, this gets back into special collections. There are doctor's records in some of the, not medical records, but like, think about traveling physicians when they would make house calls. Some of those end up in private papers, like their private diaries, their private, what am I trying to say? Basically calendars. I've seen those. This is the other place you want to make sure you're looking, is where they are buried. Now, she was buried in Lee County, North Carolina on July 31st, 1927, but this can be very specific and tell you the exact cemetery. Sometimes it will say family cemetery. Sometimes it'll tell you, a church cemetery or which town cemetery, but it'll be there. And this will tell you the undertaker or the funeral home. And this is a really important part as well, because funeral home records can actually be searched. Takes a little bit of doing, but some are out there to be researched, but it gives you another option, another place to search out. I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on the death certificates? Anything you wanted to bring up on that? This one was, as I said, it's a little bit unusual, just the sense that it was from the hospital records as opposed to an actual person providing the information. And so the information in this case wasn't always completely correct.
Right. I think you covered it very well. I think, just to reiterate, it's just important that with all records, if possible, you corroborate that information with another record if you can find one. I have seen a couple of comments in the chat, and I've had the same experience that with the state hospitals, and we talked about this also, Lisa, the fact that there's usually either missing information or incorrect information. I don't know how many other people in here have experienced the mental hospital in Goldsboro for their ancestors, but I have. And Dorothea Dix in Raleigh, and just, a couple of places where the person had a spouse, just like you say, the person had a spouse, they had, family members that should have been able to be the informant, but they weren't the informant. And so the hospital is trying to fill in whatever they know, I guess, from the admission papers or something.
I think so. Yeah, I do know. And in this case, I do know she was transferred from a hospital. Actually, I think from what is the old Rex Hospital here. So she went from Lee County Hospital to Raleigh's Hospital, which I think it was Rex, and then, or what is today Rex, and then to Dix is kind of the way it happened. We actually. And
another thing is, go ahead.
I was just saying, we actually have quite a bit of oral history that I was able to obtain on Maddie, because she's kind of been the mystery, because nobody living knew her. And I was able to interview a cousin of my grandfather's before he died. He was like in his 90s, and he was able to tell me some stuff about her. Not much about her death, but what he would tell me was enough to give me the clues that, piecing everything else together, that she probably had we think she may have had a brain tumor.
The other thing I wanted just to make sure our guests know is that there are often numbers found on the death certificate with relation to the cause of death. And there's actually an online resource where you can find a key to find out what those numbers refer to for the cause of death. And all the other places where you see random numbers, like I noticed on this one that up by the county of Wake, it says 92. And I know that North Carolina has numbers that represent each county. Is 92 the number for Wake? Does
92 is the number for Wake.
So that is corresponding to that. So you can, anywhere that you see random numbers, and they usually are handwritten on the death certificate, be sure to Google and find a key for that. And it will give you even more information than what you see.
Yes,
on
and the
death
77, I think I looked this one up, basically said it had to do with the psychosis.
Okay.
Is what that was. So yeah.
So thank you. Are you at your end, or do you still have more?
Oh, just this is
oh,
my
yeah,
end.
yeah.
This is my end. So this is one of the things that we talked about. So Ancestry.com has a lot of other types of records, and these aren't necessarily strictly North Carolina based records, but I wanted to put these up here. You know, you have the Department of Veterans Affairs, you have the burial records, the military posts, national cemeteries. They have the cemetery and funeral home collection. Actually, I put that up there twice. Sorry about that, guys. Obituary Daily Times Index. So they have a lot there. And I would encourage you, even though these are, you know, to look at some of the US based, because they will have North Carolina stuff in them as well, even though they're not specific North Carolina.
And we do have all of those links ready to go up on our page after the show.
And then you can certainly search Ancestry for others as well. But I wanted to show you that so that you can kind of get an idea of what's there. And you're welcome. I'd love for you guys to visit me at my website, the Are You My Cousin website. It's just my name, lisalisson.com. Or you can email me at lisa@lisalisson.com. But I would love to. I've written a number of articles about death records and family cemeteries and other type of ways to make sure we're getting everything we can out of those death records, to find more records as well. Now I'm done.
All right.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I have to apologize because I was pronouncing your last name incorrectly. I was saying Lisson, but it's Lisson. It's like listen to me. Okay. All right.
That's all right.
I've been doing that wrong for as long as I've known about you.
Oh, that's all right. A lot of people say that. I didn't even notice actually. So
okay.
It is not a French name. It is actually not French.
Okay. Well, you know, I want to say to the guests, to our viewers, we have run long again, and I maybe the whole 30 to 45 minute thing is just hopeless because we have so much information to share. I mean, we've talked about it on every show, how rich North Carolina is in records for those of us who are researching from there. And so we have a goal to stay within a certain time frame, but it just doesn't always quite go that way. And we have such wonderful participation and commentary in the chat. So we're going to want to share a little of that too. But as you know, we like to let you know when the content of the show is over, just in case you're someone who was just sticking with us long enough to get the meat. And so we have reached that point, but we told you on our last show that we were going to be making some special announcements on this one. And so before we go over to our after chat, we're ready to tell you what those are. Right, Tania?
That's right. Yes.
Do you want me to stop sharing? Do you want me to stop sharing?
Oh, yes, you can. Yes, please stop sharing.
Okay.
So before we get to the special announcements, let me just talk to you a little bit about our next show. And get myself together. Okay, so our next show will be July 15th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 11:30, 10:30, and 9:30, all those other times. And we have with us, we're going to be talking, well, we're actually not going to be talking. Our guest is going to be presenting for this show. She is Ari Wilkins, and she's going to be talking to us about North Carolina manuscript collections and how rich and beneficial they can be to us in our genealogical research. So we're very excited about having Ari with us on July 15th and hope that you will all join us also. As usual, you can contact Tania and me, or Tania or me at North Carolina at NC Summer Series 2020@gmail.com. Or if you'd like to contact us individually, you can see the information on the screen. For me, I'm Renata Yarbrough Sanders and Tania Y. Kuntz. All right, so what's coming up special with Let's Talk North Carolina Genealogy? We have decided to do some extended sessions in the month of August to give you a little bit more content about some subject matter that is just a little too deep to try to squeeze into 20 to 30 minutes. So the first thing we want to share is that we will be having a DNA session with genetic genealogist Shannon Christmas coming up for you in the month of August. That session is going to be targeted maybe a little bit more to our higher level guests, because we want to offer some content for those who are supporting us, but basically know everything that we're talking about. But it will be great for everyone for learning, and Shannon is going to respond to questions after he presents a little bit of information about DNA and some special situations that we see with DNA in the state of North Carolina. What else have we got coming up, Tania?
So we'll have an extended show coming up in August that will provide in-depth information about the North Carolina State Archives. So again, as you stated, Renata, and I might be appearing as a talking head, everyone, because my camera blipped out on me. But anyway, I'm still here. And so that's exciting because they have so many vast resources that we can all tap into. So it'll be good to get a more in-depth overview and explanation of what they offer.
We're really excited about that. If you have never had the chance to visit the North Carolina State Archives and Library in person, you're in for a real treat. Now, those two entities are separate entities in the same building, but both offer a lot for genealogical research. Our focus on the show is going to be on the archives, but we will have we'll have employees from there who will be talking to us, and they will make sure that all our listeners know the differences between the two sections of the building and what there is to offer you. Yeah. And last but not least, we will be wrapping up our summer series with a special show on the 5th Saturday in August. Typically, you know, we're just on the 1st and 3rd Saturdays, but we're going to do a special open panel Q&A on August 29th. We are going to invite back all of the guests that we've had with us for the summer, as well as add a couple of other specialists whose areas of expertise we may not have covered over the summer. And this is going to be a registration-only Zoom event. So we will be getting the link out in the next week or so for people who would like to register for that question and answer session. Tania, I think we have a limit of 100 for that?
A limit of 100, yes, 100.
Okay, so once you see that link, if you really think you're going to want to participate, please go ahead and register for that final session of Let's Talk North Carolina Genealogy. It will be an open panel with all of your North Carolina experts that you've met over the summer and a few more people too. So those were our special announcements for today. And we hope that you're as excited about it as we are. Before we head over to our after chat, just another thanks to Lisson. Did I say it right?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, is that no? Get me right now.
No, it is right. Lisson.
All right. Thank you so much. Your presentation was wonderful. Our guests have had many comments. They're very excited, and it's late. But Tania, do you want to share just a few of the comments real quick?
Yeah, since I had to do my camera switch over, I haven't been able to look at as many of the comments. But
I can go in there.
Okay. Yeah.
To. Okay.
A lot, but great information, wonderful presentation. I mean, you know, it's good to see that kind of feedback for us. Mavis is saying she needs a Shannon refresher. So, I think we all need a Shannon refresher.
Yeah, Shannon is so knowledgeable.
Yes.
But I want to see if I can get back up here real quick. There were a few things that people said that I wanted to point out. I know that Sherry Hudson Passy was talking about the fact that, and forgive me, Sherry, because I'm not reading it, I'm trying to remember it, but I think it was that her grandfather or one of her ancestors' headstone was incorrect, and she was able to use the SSDI, I believe it was, if I remember correctly, I'm trying to find it while I'm talking.
Yeah, I'm taking a look now too.
Here it is. Okay, my great-grandfather's death date was wrong. She proved it using funeral home records. So that's awesome that she was able to do that. And so now she always has people questioning her as to why she's using a different date than the one that's on the tombstone. And Margot Williams said she had to order an SS5 for a legal matter in 2014, that the parents' names were whited out, even though they were both born in the 1890s and now deceased. And she said that was the first time she had seen that, which I haven't seen that either.
I had that happen. And what I ended up having to do was, they told me I could resubmit. So I did. And I had to prove that the parents had already deceased. I mean, and it was, kind of, it was obvious they would have been 150 years old, but they still made me. So fortunately, I actually had the death certificate for each of the parents. One of them being the one you just saw, and then they sent me an unredacted type of information. So yeah, it was odd. It was.
Okay, I don't know if I think these might be going out. We've had wonderful participation, one called the Over Ambitious one, and she or he, I think it's she, maybe, I can't see, or they, as things are now, has already acted on some of the links that we've posted, but the Over Ambitious one said that they had ordered for the SSDI for both of their grandfathers, and they're waiting for them to arrive. And they said they learned about this on my blog. So thank you for visiting my blog. Great. But yeah, just really great audience participation. I hope everybody has access to the chat. I know if you're on a cell phone, it might be harder, but the chat is retained along with the video. And so if you get a chance to watch it on a bigger screen, you can go back and see what everybody is saying. So I think we better go ahead on over, because we're already over an hour and we've talked about so much, maybe we won't have as many questions, but let me go ahead. And if you're leaving us now, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we hope to see you back on the 15th. Now let's go on to our, what do you call it? Oh, what a special day this is.
Actually, yes, there you go. We can see it now. Yeah,
I'm trying to say, let's go over to our after chat, but for some reason I couldn't think of what we call that. So let's talk about death records. And I don't, we had so many comments, but I don't recall if there were questions.
I see at least one question.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so, let's see, I found someone, and I'm not capturing who it was, said they were told by a funeral home director that it's illegal to give, here it goes, Yolanda. I was told by a funeral director it's illegal to give out funeral information. Is that correct?
I've heard both. I don't know that it truly is.
Record?
They may think it is, but I'm not so sure it is, because I know folks who actually do get that. Actually, maybe it has to do with time periods as part of it.
When she says funeral information, is she talking about like the application, the record that?
She doesn't say. So Yolanda, if you're still here, maybe you could clarify. But the question just says funeral information.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if in more recent years there's a type of HIPAA or something like that might be involved, but older ones.
Yeah, definitely within a certain time period, I would guess. Like, we can't go and find out the kinds of records we want from something that was in 2010, most likely.
Right.
So yeah, that's really something to think about, because I have not had any. Well, my issue, and I think I mentioned it on another show, is that the funeral homes say either they had a fire, so the records are gone, or they threw them away or something like that. But I haven't had anyone say to me, we can't disclose that information.
Right. I actually had somebody come up to me after a talk one time, and she's like, she told me this story where she was researching, and I think it was a smaller town she knew, and she asked around, and finally found the person who was storing them in his basement. The funeral home was no longer in business, and for whatever reason, that person, when it went out of business, he ended up with them in his basement, and he invited her down to take a look.
Okay.
So,
well, if we don't have any other questions, I did pull something else up to share that Lisa had talked about, and I'll share this real quick. I just grabbed it from my own computer, but this is actually, for people who were curious, this is actually a mortality schedule. This is from Warren County, North Carolina, and this is from June of 1970. So you can see, as Lisa told you, it will represent 1 year past. So people who died during the year ending the 1st of June, 1870, which is going to be, I guess, May 31st till the following June. And you can see that I don't even know why I have this one. It wasn't saved under anybody's name. It's just saved on my computer. But you can see that they named the deceased. They described them by their age, their gender, and their race, whether they were married or single, where they were born. And it looks like it's only the state. This says parentage, but I don't see where anything is filled in there. It tells you the month that they died, and it tells you, as Lisa said, the profession, occupation, or trade, and then the disease or the cause of death. And, from back then, you'll see a lot of consumption and different names for things than what we use today. And you can always look those up to see what they were. So this is just an example. Dropsy, we see a lot of dropsy. Look right there, you see old age. Whooping cough, old age, not known. So this is, is that passy? Is Cherie still on? It looks like another word, but I think it's passy.
It looks like passy, yeah.
Yeah, Cherie, I don't know if you're still on. Sherry, I always call her Cherie because of the way it looks, but it's Sherry. Okay, so anyway, I just wanted to share that. Well, if we don't have any other questions, did you ladies see anything else?
Yolanda did.
The chat, so.
Yeah, Yolanda clarified that it was for a family member born about 1890, and she was looking for the parents' information and where the family member was born. So that's what the funeral home had told her they couldn't give out.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. I don't know. I'd have to check into that a little more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what a great show today. And thank you, everybody. We can't do it without you. Otherwise, it's just us sitting here chatting. And that's not what the goal of this is. So hope everybody who is celebrating today will be safe. If this holiday is meaningful to you, please enjoy it. And we will be back on July 15th with Ari Wilkins, who will be
July 18th. July 18th.
July 18th. Oh,
yes.
I'm sorry. Yes. Did I have the wrong date on the slide?
Oh, I didn't actually see the slide. Let's see. I didn't notice.
Yeah, the slide said the 15th.
I did. I had the 15th. So I won't. Everybody forgive me. It's July 18th. I'm so sorry. With Ari Wilkins, who will be coming to us from Dallas, Texas. And we're excited about that. So
yes.
Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you all. And if you're watching, hit subscribe. You can get notifications when we go live.
Absolutely.
So, great. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.